He'd buried every hope of fatherhood in the dry earth, until 5 tiny hands clawed through a storm to find him. Now, a barren rancher and 5 broken children must teach each other how to live again. The wind screamed like something alive, tearing across the flat, cracked plains with fists full of dust and grief. Jacob Carrigan dropped to one knee beside his dying horse, pulling his bandana tighter across his face as sand whipped through the air like tiny knives. The storm had come out of nowhere, a wall of beige and fury blotting out sky and sun. Even seasoned men turned back when the desert howled like this. But Jacob wasn't most men, and he hadn't been heading home. He was on the way back from burying the last of his father's things. The old man's chest, his tools, a journal half filled with regrets Jacob would never finish reading. His mother had passed 6 years prior, his wife 3 before that. And now, with no children and no family left, the land was all he had. Acres of stubborn dirt, dry pastures, and sky that never cried. Jacob had learned to stop hoping a long time ago. But hope doesn't knock politely, it crashes through hell. He first heard the screams beneath the storm, thin, high-pitched, almost carried off by the wind before they reached him. He thought it might be a coyote at first, or maybe some trick of the storm playing games with a lonely man's ears. But then came another cry. Then another, fainter, more desperate. Jacob didn't think, he moved. He staggered forward blindly, one hand shielding his eyes, the other outstretched like a man feeling for the edge of a cliff. He could barely see 3 feet ahead, the wind slashing sideways now, cutting his visibility to nothing. Then he tripped, hard. His knee struck something soft, and a whimper answered. It was a child. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her clothes were rags, torn and caked in sand. Her lips were cracked, cheeks raw from the wind. She looked up with terrified eyes, mouth too dry to form words. Her little fingers curled around his sleeve with the strength of the dying. Jacob didn't hesitate. He scooped her into one arm and called out into the storm, voice ragged and sharp. Anyone else out here? A cough answered, then a second. He turned, shielding the child in his coat, stumbling toward the sound. 2 boys crouched together beneath the shattered frame of a buckboard, their eyes bloodshot, faces blistered. One looked no older than 10. The other was maybe 8. And there beside them, curled like kittens against the wheels, were 2 more children, twins by the look of them, maybe 4, limp as dolls and barely breathing. 5 of them. 5 children, half dead and buried in a sandstorm that would have eaten them whole if he'd come through 5 minutes later. He didn't waste time. He threw the oldest boy over his shoulder, tucked the smallest against his chest, and ordered the other 2 to hang onto his belt and not let go. They didn't ask questions. They just obeyed like they'd learned long ago not to hope, only to follow. It took nearly an hour to find his way back to his wagon, and by then the storm had peeled the skin from his knuckles and filled his boots with grit. His horse was dead, but the wagon still stood, a blessing he didn't dare question. He piled the children inside, wrapped them in every blanket he had, and poured what was left of his water into their mouths, drop by precious drop. Only when they were huddled and trembling together did he sit down, lean his head back against the wagon wall, and realize his hands were shaking. The girl who had grabbed his sleeve was pressed close beside him now, her head resting against his arm like she trusted him to guard her dreams. Jacob hadn't cried in 7 years. But something about that weight, a child's head against his shoulder, warm and alive, and not his by blood but his by fate, unlocked a flood inside him that sand and sorrow had failed to bury. He didn't sleep that night. He kept watch instead, holding the rifle in one hand and the child in the other, as if daring the desert to try again. By morning the storm had passed. The sky was as blue as a memory. He hitched the wagon by hand, straining every muscle to drag it east toward the ranch. It took the better part of 2 days, the wagon axle moaning and his back aching with every step. But they made it. Carrigan Ranch wasn't much, just a stretch of land clinging to survival, a windmill that whined more than it turned, and a house built by his grandfather's bare hands. But when he pulled up to the porch, and those 5 children looked up at the crooked roof with something like awe, Jacob felt the quiet shift of something holy. They didn't speak much, not at first. The girl, her name was Layla, had a voice like broken reeds. She whispered more than she talked and clung to the twins like a mother twice her age. The oldest boy called himself Micah, and he stood like a soldier, always between the others and the door. The second boy, Eli, rarely looked anyone in the eye, and the twins, Nate and Noah, were shadows, following Leela's every move with silent devotion. Jacob didn't ask too many questions. They didn't offer answers. He bathed them, fed them, gave them each a bed. Not much, but more than they'd had. It was Micah who broke the silence. "You gonna send us back?" Jacob was whittling a post on the porch. He looked up slowly. "Back where?" Micah's jaw tightened. "Wherever they send kids that don't belong nowhere." Jacob set down the knife. "You belong here now." It was just 4 words, but the look in Micah's eyes, suspicion cracking into something softer like a wall giving way, was louder than any shout. That night Jacob found Leela kneeling by her bed, whispering into her hands. He stood in the doorway, unseen, listening to her prayer. "Thank you for not letting us die. Thank you for the man with the kind eyes. Please don't let him change his mind." Jacob closed the door quietly and leaned against it, heart heavy. They didn't know it yet, but he needed them more than they needed him. The days that followed weren't easy. The boys had nightmares. Leela flinched at sudden noises. The twins refused to be separated for more than a minute without screaming. Jacob did his best, but he was one man with a broken past and no idea how to raise 5 souls hurt worse than he was. Still, something grew. Leela began humming when she swept the floor. Eli started drawing animals in the dirt with a stick. Micah chopped wood without being asked. The twins laughed once, then again. The sound startled the chickens. Jacob caught himself smiling at nothing. Once, he found a small handprint on the window and didn't clean it off. But peace is a fragile thing in the West. And storms don't always come from the sky. The sheriff arrived 3 days later, just as Jacob was tending to the south fence. The children were out back near the chicken coop, under strict instructions not to wander far. Leela had taken to playing teacher with the twins, drawing letters in the dust with a stick while Eli hunted for bugs and Micah sat with his back to the wind, ever the watchman. Jacob saw the glint of the badge first, then the familiar slope of Sheriff Alton Burke's shoulders as the man dismounted and tied his horse to the porch rail. "Didn't figure you for company," Burke said, eyes drifting past Jacob toward the house. "Didn't figure you for small talk," Jacob replied, dusting off his hands. "What brings you out this far?" The sheriff got straight to the point. "Heard a group of children went missing near Dry Fork, 5 of them, same week the storm came through." Jacob didn't blink. "I found 5 out there." "Dead?" "No." He glanced toward the back of the house, where small voices still floated up in soft bursts. "Not yet, anyway." Burke stepped up onto the porch, boots creaking beneath his weight. "You plan on telling me anything else, or just leaving me to guess?" Jacob took a breath. "They were nearly gone when I found them. No wagon, no supplies, nothing but sand in their lungs and sun on their backs. I didn't ask names. Figured they'd speak when they were ready." Burke nodded slowly, lips pressed thin. "You gonna bring them in?" "To what?" "There's an orphanage out in Lewis. Reverend Henley runs it. Decent place, far as I can tell." Jacob crossed his arms. "And what if they've had their fill of decent places? What if the last one they knew turned them out into that storm?" The sheriff's silence said enough. "You got any names?" Jacob asked. Burke reached into his coat, pulled out a slip of paper, unfolded it. "Only 2, Micah and Leela Boone. Siblings, parents dead, the other 3, no record, likely cousins or strays. It's a mess." Jacob nodded. "Well, I ain't sending them back into a mess." The sheriff studied him carefully. "You planning to keep them, Jacob, you of all people?" Jacob didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The way he squared his shoulders, the way his jaw set, it said enough. "I'm not the same man I was when Martha passed," Jacob finally said. "And maybe I wasn't meant to be a father then, but maybe I was meant to be something now." Burke looked down at his boots, then back up. "I'll give you time, but folks'll come asking. You know how this goes." Jacob nodded. "Let them come." That night Micah came to him while he was stoking the fire. The boy stood in the doorway, arms crossed tight, his expression unreadable. "You gonna give us away?" Jacob didn't flinch. "You still breathing, aren't you?" Micah stared at him a long while, like he was trying to read a truth beneath the words. Then he nodded once and left. Leela came next, not long after. She crept in quietly and held out something wrapped in a kerchief. Jacob unfolded it, 3 dead beetles, neatly arranged. "I told Eli not to put 'em in the stew," she whispered, "so he gave them to me to keep." Jacob didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Instead, he reached into his coat and handed her a butterscotch candy from the jar he kept hidden. Her eyes widened. "You can keep that," he said. "No bugs required." She hugged him. Just like that. No warning, no permission. She threw her little arms around his waist, pressed her cheek to his stomach, and held on. He didn't know what to do with his hands, so he just rested them gently on her back and closed his eyes. He dreamed of Martha that night. She was standing in the garden, smiling, her hair caught in the breeze, and she was holding a child, no, several, one on each side, laughing. He woke with tears on his cheeks. The next week passed with rhythm, chores, meals, sun, and sleep. Jacob taught the older boys how to mend fences and chop kindling. Leela took over the kitchen with a kind of stubborn grace that reminded him too much of his late wife. Eli wandered more, but always came back. The twins had a language of their own, half whispers, half giggles, and they'd begun to paint the walls of the barn with colored mud. There were hard moments, too. The night Micah woke screaming. The afternoon Leela flinched when Jacob raised his voice to call the cattle in. The way Eli hid behind doors and whispered apologies when he hadn't done a thing wrong. But there were good ones, too. Micah learning to ride. Leela baking bread that didn't break teeth. Eli catching a frog and giving it a name. Nate and Noah sharing a blanket with Jacob during a thunderstorm and declaring the floor safer with him on it. And then came the man in the black coat. Jacob was leading the mule out to the field when he saw the rider, a tall figure straight-backed, a black coat trailing like smoke behind him. His horse was fine-boned, pure white, out of place on the dusty trail. The man didn't tie off. He rode straight up to the porch, dismounted with practiced ease, and knocked once. By the time Jacob reached the steps, the children had vanished into the house. Leela's face appeared behind the curtain, pale and tight. The man turned. He wore no badge, no gun Jacob could see, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp, and when he smiled, it didn't reach past his teeth. "Jacob Carrigan," he said, voice smooth. "I hear you've acquired some unexpected guests." "Who's asking?" "My name is Silas Granger. I represent certain interested parties back east." Jacob folded his arms. "That's supposed to impress me." Granger's smile widened. "I'm here on behalf of a gentleman who claims kinship with 2 of the children in your care. He wants them returned." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "Which 2? "Leela and Micah Boone. Their uncle, Luther Boone, believes it's time they were brought back into the fold. I found them half dead in a storm." "Yes, well, accidents happen. Families fall apart. Mr. Boone regrets the misunderstanding." Jacob said nothing. Granger's smile thinned. "You understand, of course, that you're not legally permitted to harbor children without proper guardianship. You're not kin. You have no papers. The law is clear." Jacob stepped forward. "And what happens if I don't let you take them?" Granger tilted his head. Then the law will come, and it will take not just the Boones but all of them. Wouldn't want that, would we? Jacob stared at him long and hard, then said, "Get off my land." Granger didn't blink. "You've made your position clear. I'll pass word along to Mr. Boone, but I suggest you prepare. Next time the man who comes knocking won't be me." He mounted up and rode off without another word. Jacob stood there for a long time, fists clenched, heart pounding like war drums. He knew men like Granger, and worse, he knew what kind of man would hire him. Luther Boone wasn't coming to reunite with family. He was coming to take something he didn't deserve. And Jacob wasn't about to let him. That night he told the children the truth. They sat around the table silent, faces shadowed in lamplight. "He's coming for you," Jacob said. Micah claims he's your uncle." Micah's expression turned to stone. Leela's eyes filled with tears. "He heard our mama," Micah whispered. "That's why we ran." Jacob nodded. "Then we make sure you don't go back." "But the law," Leela said softly. Jacob looked around the table. "The law doesn't always protect the right people, but I will. You have my word." Outside, thunder rolled on the horizon. A storm was coming. But this time, Jacob Carrigan wasn't alone. And he wasn't burying hope anymore. He was fighting for it. The rain didn't fall that night, but the wind howled as if the storm knew it had been summoned. Every shutter on the ranch beat like a warning drum, and Jacob lay awake long after the children had gone to bed. He kept a loaded rifle beside the door and the lantern low. Every shadow stretched long and mean across the wood-grain floor. His eyes kept drifting to the staircase, to the soft creak of footsteps above where 5 lives now slept under his roof. He didn't know what made a man a father, not really, but he knew what didn't, and the world outside had been full of men who never earned the title. Leela had wept when she heard Luther's name, silent and shaking, clinging to Micah like a leaf in a windstorm. Jacob had seen it before. He'd seen it in Martha's eyes, in the way she'd gone quiet for days after word arrived that her sister had taken her own life to escape a man who called himself husband. That same quiet was on Leela now, not the silence of rest but the kind born of fear that never unclenched. Jacob sat at the table, hands clasped, listening to the wind scrape against the windows like claws. He whispered a prayer, not out loud but deep inward from that part of him that used to believe he'd been forgotten by heaven. "If I was wrong all these years," he thought, "then let me be right this time. Let me be enough." Morning came slow and gray, the kind of light that made you feel like something was watching. He didn't tell the children what he was planning. They didn't need the wait, but he told Burke. The sheriff came before noon, dust rising behind his horse like a signal fire. He dismounted before the porch and didn't speak until Jacob opened the door. "Granger came by my office," he said, brushing his hat clean. "Told me you were interfering in family matters." Jacob nodded once. "That's one way to phrase it." Burke sighed, "And the other way?" "I'm keeping 5 children out of a grave." The sheriff looked past him into the house. Leela and Micah were peeling potatoes at the kitchen table. They didn't look up. Eli was on the floor, surrounded by twigs and rope. He called it a trap for catching the bad man. The twins were curled in the sun spot by the window, asleep. Burke's voice dropped low. "You know what you're doing." "No," Jacob admitted. "But I know what I won't do. I won't let Luther Boone take them back. He left them to die in a sandstorm, Alton." "Maybe not legally." "Legal ain't the same as right." The sheriff rubbed the back of his neck. "You got 2 options, Jacob. Either we drag this through the courts, let folks miles away decide what's best for them, or you disappear." Jacob didn't flinch. "I'm not running." "I didn't say run. I said disappear. There's land out by Hollow Ridge, abandoned for years. If someone were to take those children out there for a while, well, I'd be mighty hard-pressed to find them." Jacob looked him in the eye. "And you'd be all right with that?" I didn't say that. Burke adjusted his hat. But I ain't forgotten what you did after Martha passed. I saw a man try to bury himself with her. Now I'm seeing one dig 5 lives out of the dirt. That counts for something. Jacob nodded. I'll need 2 days. Burke nodded back. I'll give you 3. That night, Jacob told the children. It wasn't a speech. It was a supper with too few words and too much meaning. After the plates were cleared, he stood and said only, "We're leaving." Leela was the first to speak. Where? A place the law won't look for us, not for a while. Eli blinked. Are we bad? No, Jacob said gently, but some folks don't know how to see good. Micah stood slowly. You sure we can trust you? Jacob didn't answer. He just took a step forward, pulled something from his coat, and handed it to the boy. It was his wedding band. This belonged to Martha, Jacob said. I never took it off. Not until now. You keep it, Micah. You keep it till you believe I won't leave. Micah didn't speak, but he didn't hand it back either. They left at dawn, horses packed with supplies, the children wrapped in wool and silence. The trail to Hollow Ridge was old, nearly forgotten. Brush and bramble reached over it like fingers, and the rocks beneath the hooves threatened to snap ankles with every misstep. But Jacob knew it well. Years ago, when grief chased him like a shadow, he'd ridden that trail more times than he could count, looking for peace in the hills where no voices lived. Now, the silence was filled with the rustle of 5 small bodies and the breath of hope. It took them a full day to reach the cabin. It leaned more than it stood, one wall half swallowed by ivy, roof patched with rusted tin and stubborn moss. But it was dry, and it was theirs. Jacob spent the first night patching the chimney while the children turned the old hayloft into a nest of blankets. The boys slept side by side, all 4 of them curled in a single row like pups. Leela laid beside the hearth, her eyes open long after the flames died down. I don't want to go back, she whispered. Jacob looked over from his bedroll. You won't. He'll come. He'll try. You're not scared. Jacob thought of Martha, of the graves he dug and the prayers he stopped saying. I'm more scared of losing you than I am of him. That was the truth. They made a life of it. It wasn't easy. Jacob taught the boys to hunt, to track rabbits and scare off snakes. Leela learned to boil pine needles into tea and mend shirts with wire thread. Eli built forts in the woods and named each tree like a general naming his army. The twins followed Jacob everywhere, their footsteps silent, always watching. And the days passed. Until the smoke came. Jacob smelled it first, acrid, sharp, wrong. Then he saw it curling above the trees like a snake. He ran. It was the cabin. The fire hadn't reached it yet, but it was close, too close. He found Micah and Leela outside with buckets, trying to wet the walls. The others were inside, packing. Jacob didn't ask who had said it. He already knew. Granger. Or someone like him. A message, not a killing blow, but it was meant to scare. It didn't. They left again, this time heading north toward a stretch of land Jacob once helped a widow settle on before the war came and took her son. It was overgrown now, but the cabin still stood. He told the children they were pioneers, that they were building something no one else had touched. He didn't mention the scorched grass or the fact that someone had followed them. He taught Micah how to shoot. Not to kill, he said, but to protect. Micah nodded. I won't miss. He didn't. The first time they saw Granger again, it wasn't from up close. It was a silhouette on a ridge, a black figure on a white horse, watching. Micah saw him first, then Jacob, then nothing, just wind. Granger didn't come down that night. But the next day, there were footprints. Small ones. And that's when Jacob knew they were being hunted. Not followed, not watched. Hunted. He built traps with Eli's help, crude snares and trip lines. He posted watch at night, sitting by the window with the rifle across his lap. Micah stayed beside him. He didn't ask to, he just sat. "We should leave again," Micah whispered one night. "No," Jacob said, "running is what prey does." "What do we do then?" "We make him sorry." The attack came 3 nights later. Not with fire, but with silence, the kind that creeps in and waits. Jacob was in the barn checking the roof when he heard the scream. Leela's. He ran. Inside, the door had been broken. Splinters hung from the frame like torn paper. Eli was crying, clutching a bleeding arm. The twins were gone. Jacob didn't think. He grabbed the rifle and ran into the trees, shouting their names. Nate, Noah. No answer. Then laughter. Not from the boys. From a man. Granger stepped from behind a tree, holding both boys by the wrists. He looked amused. "They're light," he said. "Thought they'd squirm more." "Let them go," Jacob growled. "I will, after you listen." Jacob raised the rifle. "You've got 2 seconds. "Your mistake," Granger said. But Micah had already taken the shot. It cracked through the trees like thunder. Granger fell, not dead, but wounded. The boys scrambled free. Jacob ran, tackled the man to the ground, disarmed him, and held the rifle to his throat. Granger smiled through the blood. "They'll never stop coming." Jacob didn't blink. "Then they'll never stop bleeding." He didn't kill him. He could have, maybe should have, but he didn't. He tied him to a tree, left him with a warning. "You follow us again, I won't miss either." They left that night. Again. But they weren't running anymore. They were surviving. Together. And from that moment on, Jacob wasn't just a man with a broken past. He was a father. Not by blood. By choice. And sometimes that's stronger. The days that followed blurred into one another, not from boredom, but from the kind of exhaustion that carved itself into the bones. Jacob, the children, and the burden of staying unseen wove their lives into something both makeshift and meaningful. They found shelter in the ruins of an old line shack tucked between high pines and outcroppings of rock, walls half gone, but defensible. Jacob repaired the roof with branches and tar cloth, and Leela sewed together blankets from flour sacks and cast-off, clothes they'd carried with them through fire and fear. But something had changed in them all. It wasn't just the near loss. It wasn't just Granger's blood on the snow-packed dirt or the sound of that gunshot splitting the silence like a thunderclap from heaven itself. It was what followed, that hush after violence, the way it lingered, the knowledge that they couldn't go back to what had come before, not ever. The children had once looked to Jacob like he was a temporary anchor in a churning storm. Now they looked at him as something more solid, more permanent. And Jacob, he no longer questioned it. One night, while the wind rattled the makeshift shutters and the twins slept wrapped around each other like vines, Jacob took the ring from Micah's pocket and gave it to Leela. "This belonged to Martha," he said quietly, careful not to wake the others. "She never got to raise children, but I think, if she could see us now, she'd be proud of how you watch over your brothers." Leela didn't speak, but she slid the ring onto a string and wore it like a pendant. From then on, she never took it off. They didn't speak about Granger in the days that followed, but he lingered. In every distant sound, every bird that flew off too suddenly, every snapped twig in the woods beyond sight. They knew he wasn't finished. Jacob had left him tied to a tree, but men like Granger didn't let go. They came back, not for justice, for revenge. And still they carved a life. Micah and Eli helped Jacob trap rabbits. The twins began learning to count using pine cones and stones, whispering the numbers to each other like secrets. Leela scouted water routes with Jacob, mapping the hills and drawing lines in the dirt with a stick. She had her mother's steadiness. Jacob could see it, though she never spoke of her. He imagined the woman must have been like stone and sunlight, tough enough to survive the storms, kind enough to raise 5 children under a man like Luther Boone. Then came the rider. He wasn't Granger, but Jacob knew trouble when he saw it. The man didn't carry a badge, but he didn't need one. He was clean-shaven, in a pressed coat despite the mud, and his horse was lean and quiet like it had seen worse things than wolves. Jacob watched him through the crack in the wall as the man circled the clearing once, then twice, before stopping near the trail and dismounting slowly. Didn't shout, didn't knock. Just stood there, staring at the shack with the kind of patience that made Jacob's blood go cold. Inside, the children waited, silent. They knew what to do. Leela had her brothers tucked under the floor trap Jacob had carved 2 weeks back, just in case. That just in case had come. Jacob stepped outside with the rifle tucked across his chest, not threatening, but not hiding either. The man smiled. Name S. Carter. Don't recall inviting you, Jacob replied. I'm not here to cause problems, Carter said. Just came to ask a few questions. Jacob didn't move. You wear that coat too clean for wandering woods. What law sends a man like you out here? No law, Carter said evenly. Private interest. Jacob raised a brow. Granger. Carter didn't blink. Boone. Jacob's heart pounded once hard. He sent you. No, Carter said. I work around men like him, not for them, and you ought to know he's been stirring the pot. Jacob said nothing. He's told everyone from the next county over that you stole his children, beat his boy half dead, tried to murder him. Jacob's eyes narrowed. Carter added, the sheriff tried to keep it quiet, but Luther made sure it spread. There's a bounty now, on you. Jacob didn't flinch. And what's your angle? Carter glanced back toward the woods. You think I'm the only one who will come? They'll keep coming until someone kills him or someone kills you. Likely both. Inside the shack, a floorboard creaked. Micah, maybe, or Leela checking on the boys. Carter didn't look toward the sound, but Jacob knew he'd heard it. Why are you really here? Jacob asked. Carter hesitated. Then he said, I was like them once, boy under a man like Boone. I got away, someone helped me, a rancher, risked everything, so now I try to do the same. Jacob studied him for a long moment. What do you want? A head start, Carter said, before more bounty men come, before Boone hires worse. And you'd give that? Carter nodded, but you can't stay here. Jacob turned slightly, eyes drifting toward the tree line. We won't. I'll buy you time, Carter said, 2 weeks, then I'm out, and when I'm out the wolves come. He left without another word. That night Jacob packed. They left at dawn. This time they didn't head deeper into the forest. Jacob had another idea. There was a mining town 2 valleys west, abandoned 10 years ago after the river dried. But Jacob had worked it before it died. He knew the shafts, the bunkhouses, the hidden paths through the stone. If there was anywhere a man could hide 5 children from the law and the lawless, it was there. They traveled through sleet and wind, nights under tarps, days on foot when the horses grew tired. Through it all, no one complained. Not even the twins. When they finally arrived, the place was exactly as Jacob remembered, empty, quiet, dead. But the bones were strong. One bunkhouse still had an intact roof. The mine shaft had collapsed, but the lower tunnel remained, cool and dry and perfect for hiding. They settled in. Days became routine again. Leela took to cooking in the big stove like she'd been born to it. Micah and Jacob repaired the outer walls. Eli dug a small garden near the riverbed. The twins drew pictures in the ash with sticks, smiling again like real boys. But always they watched. Jacob didn't know when Boone himself would come, but he would. Men like him couldn't let go of anything, not pride, not property, not even the pain they caused. It was all they had. One night, while Jacob checked traps near the ridge, Micah followed. "Can I help?" the boy asked. Jacob handed him a snare. "Always." Micah hesitated. Do you think they'll ever let us be? Jacob crouched beside a rabbit trail tying off a loop. They might, if we make them. Micah was quiet. Then he said, if I have to shoot again, I will. Jacob looked at him. You won't have to, he said, not if I can help it. But he knew it wasn't a promise he could keep. And 3 days later, the horses came. 4 riders, armed, faces half covered with dust cloths, guns on their hips like extensions of their hands. One carried a red scarf tied around his neck, Boone's old gang symbol. Jacob knew it well. He saw them from the ridge, through the spyglass Carter had left behind. He counted rifles. 4. And he only had 2 that worked. But he had something they didn't. Children who knew how to listen. He told Leela to hide with the twins in the shaft. Gave Micah and Eli positions, one above the bunkhouse with a slingshot, the other in the stable with noise traps rigged to alert them of movement. Jacob stood alone in the clearing as the men arrived. You Jacob Mercer? The lead rider asked. Jacob nodded. You've got something belongs to Mr. Boone. Jacob's voice was steady. I've got 5 children who don't belong to any man but God. The rider spit. Boone disagrees. I'm not interested in Boone's opinion. That's unfortunate. The gunfight started fast. Micah's slingshot hit the rider in the eye. The second man lunged forward, but Jacob shot clean, shoulder hit, down but not dead. Eli's noise trap sprang, sending metal clanging through the trees. Leela struck the third with a rock from the shadows when he crept toward the shaft. By the time it ended, 2 were dead. 1 fled. And the 4th, the leader, was tied to a post, bloodied, breathing, and furious. You're dead, he rasped at Jacob. No, Jacob said. I was, when I lost my wife, when I thought I had nothing left, but not anymore. You think you can fight Boone forever? Jacob looked toward the shaft, where the children now stood, peering from the shadows. I'm not fighting for forever, he said, just long enough. The man sneered, you'll lose. Jacob leaned in. You don't understand, I already won. And in that quiet after the storm, with blood in the dirt and firelight on their faces, Jacob gathered the children close and told them a story. About a man who lost everything. About a storm that brought 5 voices crying through the dust. About a family he never asked for but would die to protect. And the children, no longer broken, no longer lost, held on to him like roots hold to earth. They were his. And he was theirs. Not by law. Not by blood. But by love. The strongest bond of all. It snowed that night, a soft early fall of white across the roof and ridge that blanketed the mine town in silence, the kind of hush that made it hard to tell if the world was ending or just holding its breath. Jacob stood at the edge of the clearing, shotgun lowered, watching the last of the flurries settle over the ridgeline. The children slept inside. For once, all of them. No one had nightmares. No one flinched in sleep. He didn't take that for granted. Granger was still out there. Boone, too. The law hadn't come yet, but it would eventually. And even though they'd won the last fight, Jacob knew what was coming wasn't a single storm. It was a season of them. One after another, wearing a man down the way water wears down stone. Still, he didn't regret it, not a bit. Not when Micah woke up before dawn to check the rabbit snares. Not when Eli carefully whittled little wooden animals for the twins, painting them with ash and berry juice. Not when Leela combed her brother's hair with an old fork, humming the same quiet hymn every morning, voice steady like she'd been born to mothering. They'd lost too much to live like victims, so they lived like they had roots. But fear crept in all the same. It showed up in the little things. Leela sleeping with her shoes on, Micah keeping the rifle beside him, hand on it even in sleep. Eli flinching at every crack of firewood. The twins drawing pictures in the dirt that showed men with no faces. They were holding on, but just barely. Jacob knew it was time to move again. They couldn't stay hidden in the mining town forever. Eventually, someone else would come looking. The bounty might fade, but Boone's thirst for power wouldn't. It would just change shape. The kind of man who beat children wasn't just cruel, he was relentless. So Jacob made a plan. There was a river town 5 days south, Carrow's Mill. Small, quiet, out of the way. Jacob knew a widow there, Mary Trenton. Her husband had died in a grain fire years back. Since then, she ran a boarding house near the river. Honest, God-fearing, and careful. If anyone could help, it was Mary. But it was a long ride. And Jacob couldn't take them all. Not across open land, not with Granger still hunting. So he chose the only path that made sense. He'd ride ahead, scout the trail, speak with Mary, and come back. If it was safe, they'd move. It hurt to leave them, even for a short while. The morning he rode out, Micah tried to follow him. Jacob turned and knelt beside him, hands steady on the boy's shoulders. "You're the man of the house while I'm gone." Micah's eyes shone, but he didn't cry, just nodded. "I'll keep them safe." "I know you will." Jacob pressed a note into his hand. "If something happens, you find Mary, she'll help you, understand?" Micah nodded again. Jacob turned to Leela, crouched beside the twins near the fire. "You're the heart, keep it beating." Leela didn't speak, just stood and hugged him tight around the middle. When he left, they watched until he disappeared between the trees. The ride was rough. Snow turned to sleet by the second day, and Jacob's horse threw a shoe before dusk. He walked the next stretch, boots soaked through, shoulders hunched against the wind. Twice he spotted riders in the distance and had to hide off-trail, rifle at the ready, breathing quiet. But they passed without stopping. On the third day, he reached Carrow's Mill. It was just as he remembered, 3 rows of weathered buildings, a church at the end, and the sound of the river groaning under half-frozen ice. Mary's boarding house stood near the edge with its yellow door and creaking porch. He knocked once. She opened with a shotgun in hand. "Jacob Mercer," she said, blinking. "I thought you died." "Almost." She let him in, poured coffee, sat across the table like she'd been waiting years for this conversation. "You need something," she said flatly. "5 children," Jacob said. "Under 13, I can't keep them in hiding forever. They need school, church, a town." "Yours?" "They are now." She didn't ask more. She knew the kind of man Jacob was, and the kind of men that turned him into a protector. "I'll help," she said. He slept that night for the first time in what felt like weeks. But when he woke the next morning, something was wrong. The sky was dark, too dark for morning. The wind had turned violent again, but that wasn't it. It was something deeper, a feeling in his gut, the same one he'd had the day Boone first came looking, the kind of dread that sat like a stone behind the ribs. He packed fast, thanked Mary, and rode hard. The snow thickened as he went, but he didn't stop. Not to eat, not to sleep. The river crossed behind him and the pines closed in around the trail. He lost a stirrup, tore his coat, bloodied his hands pulling brush from the path, but he didn't stop. He reached the mine town at nightfall. And it was empty. No smoke, no sound, no light. Jacob slid from the saddle, boots crunching on snow, heart pounding louder than his steps. "Leela," he called softly. "Micah." No answer. The door hung open. Inside, the place had been tossed, blankets scattered, traps smashed, the little carved animals broken on the floor like bones. He found a smear of blood on the wall. Too high for a child. Granger. Jacob's throat went dry. He raced through the bunkhouse, then the shaft, then the stables, all empty, silent. Gone. All gone. Until a sound. Soft, ragged, behind the chimney stones. He drew his rifle and approached slowly. A hand reached out from the shadows, small, shaking. Micah. His face was bruised. one eye nearly swollen shut, but he was alive. Jacob dropped to his knees and pulled him close. "Where are the others?" Micah gasped. "They took Leela, the twins, Eli." Jacob's stomach dropped. "Granger." Micah nodded. "How many?" "4, maybe 5, came at night. We tried, Eli fought, Leela screamed, but they had guns, took them, said Boone wanted them back." Jacob closed his eyes. Micah clung to him like a drowning man. "We have to get them," the boy whispered. "We have to." Jacob rose slowly. Rage burned in him, but not the kind that made a man reckless, the kind that sharpened him. He gave Micah water, dressed his wounds, fed him the last of the salted pork, let him sleep by the fire wrapped in Jacob's coat. And while he slept, Jacob carved a plan. He knew Boone's patterns, knew the land, knew that Granger wouldn't go straight home, not with children in tow. He'd take them to the halfway station, an old saloon turned outpost south of the split trail, safe enough, hidden enough. Jacob gathered what little they had left. A revolver, 2 knives, a sack of powder, a torn map. Then he sat beside Micah and waited for dawn. "Will we get them back?" Micah asked. Jacob didn't lie. "I'll bring them home," he said. And in his voice there wasn't a trace of doubt. Because this time, Jacob Mercer wasn't just a rancher. He was a father. And fathers don't quit. They fight. They bleed. They burn the world if they must. For the ones they love. The first snow had hardened into crusted ice, and Jacob's boots broke through it with every step as he led Micah away from the ruins of their hideout. They didn't speak much. There was nothing left to say. The silence between them was thick, packed with grief and fear and something else Jacob refused to name yet, determination maybe, or something sharper. They followed the river trail south, then cut west where the trees thickened. Jacob knew these lands better than any man alive. Boone might have had men, but Jacob had purpose, and God help whoever stood between him and those children. They moved only by night, sheltering in abandoned cabins and rock hollows by day. Micah barely slept. Each time he closed his eyes, his shoulders twitched and his hands clenched like he was still holding a rifle that had long since been knocked from his grasp. But he never asked to turn back. Not once. His eyes had gone older somehow, stretched thin and worn like rope left out in sun and rain. Jacob saw himself in that look, and it broke something in him. On the third night, they reached the ridge that overlooked Devil's Hollow. The outpost was just as Jacob remembered, a rotted saloon squatting like a spider in the snow, its second floor sagging, its windows blacked out. One horse was tied out front, another near the side fence. A third lay dead near the trough, shot clean through the eye. "They've been here a while," Jacob whispered. Micah crouched beside him, eyes narrowed. "You think Leela's in there?" "I think she's alive." It wasn't an answer, not really, but it was enough to keep moving. They waited until the wind picked up, masking their steps with gusts and broken snow. Jacob crept down first, boots silent on the ice, revolver drawn. He checked the back, then the stable. Empty. Inside the saloon, voices echoed, low, laughing, slurred with drink. "Leave the girl alone, Granger," someone barked. "She's just pretty when she fights," came the reply. "Like her mother, I bet." Jacob's blood went cold. He turned to Micah, pressed a hand to the boy's chest. "Stay here." Micah's jaw clenched. "I can help." "You will, when the time's right." He slipped into the side entrance, moving through the kitchen. The air stank of tobacco and spilled whiskey. From behind the swinging door he could make out 4 voices, 2 by the bar, 1 pacing upstairs, and Granger somewhere close. He stepped into the hall. The first man didn't see him coming. Jacob hit him with the butt of the revolver, fast and brutal. The man crumpled silently. The second turned and opened his mouth to shout, but Jacob fired once, a clean shot through the shoulder. He dropped hard, screaming. The noise brought the others. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Granger's voice barked orders. "Find him, he's alone." Jacob ducked behind a beam as bullets splintered wood around him. He fired once more, then again. One man fell with a groan. Another cursed and fled toward the back door. Jacob let him run. He was after one man. Granger kicked open the upper door, dragging Leela in front of him like a shield. Her face was pale, but her eyes were furious. "She screamed your name," Granger called down, pressing a gun to her ribs. "Isn't that sweet? You come all this way for a brat that ain't even yours." "Let her go," Jacob growled. "She's mine," Granger said, grinning. "Boone paid good money for her, and those others, they'll fetch enough to buy me a ranch twice your size. You lay one more finger on her, and I'll tear your hands off." Granger laughed. "You think this is a story where the hero wins? Ain't no heroes left, Mercer, just survivors." Then the shot came. Not Jacob's. Micah stood at the base of the stairs, rifle braced against his shoulder, jaw tight. The bullet tore through Granger's thigh. He howled and dropped Leela, stumbling against the railing. She scrambled free. Jacob didn't hesitate. He surged up the stairs and slammed into Granger with the weight of every mile he'd walked, every child he'd comforted, every loss he'd endured. They crashed through the door into the cold upper room. Granger swung his pistol wildly. Jacob knocked it away. They grappled, fists slamming into bone and wood, blood soaking the floor. "You're too late," Granger spat, grabbing a knife from his boot. "Boone's already got the others, took them south, said he'd burn them if they didn't behave." Jacob froze for half a heartbeat. Then he headbutted Granger so hard, the man went limp. He tied him up, hands and feet, then dragged him down the stairs. Leela ran to Micah and hugged him, trembling. Jacob crouched beside them. "Are you hurt?" Leela shook her head. "He didn't touch me, not really, he just talked." "That's over now." She glanced up. "What about the twins, Eli?" Jacob stood slowly, eyes hard. "We ride south tonight." But first he needed answers. He waited until Granger came to, then dragged him to a chair and dumped a pail of snow over his face. "Boone took the boys," Jacob said. "Where?" Granger laughed, blood in his teeth. "Why should I tell you?" Jacob didn't blink. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure you never speak again." Granger stared at him, then glanced at Micah, standing behind him with the rifle still raised. "They're at Dry Hollow," Granger muttered. "Old sawmill. Boone's waiting on a buyer. Said they're worth more than gold." "Who's buying?" Granger smiled. "Men like Boone, ones who like obedience." Jacob's stomach turned. He knocked Granger out cold and tied him to the post with every rope they had. Then he turned to the children. They had one more ride ahead. Leela rode with Jacob. Micah led the second horse. The wind howled as they cut through the forest, past ghosted shacks and fallen trees. At dawn, they reached the edge of Dry Hollow. The sawmill stood crooked on a slope of frozen earth, smoke curling from its chimney. 2 guards walked the perimeter. A wagon waited out front, empty cage in the back. Jacob handed Micah a knife. "Stay here, protect your sister." "I want to fight." "You will if I don't come back." Then he disappeared into the trees. The approach was slow. He circled wide, watching the guards' rhythm. He counted steps, timed turns. When the moment came, he struck fast. One man dropped with a rock to the temple. The second took a blade across the throat before he could shout. Jacob took the guard's coat and slipped inside the mill. It was dark. The air was thick with sawdust and sweat. And then he heard it. A cough, then another. He turned the corner and saw them. Eli crouched over the twins, both shivering, chained to a beam. Eli looked up. "Jacob." "I'm here." He broke the lock with the guard's keys, pulling the boys into his arms. "We're leaving." Eli shook his head. Boone's upstairs. He said he'd kill us if we tried. Jacob helped the twins stand. He won't. Because Jacob wasn't leaving another child behind. They moved quietly, but the boards creaked, and the front door burst open before they reached the stairs. Boone stepped in, broad-shouldered, fur-lined coat dusted with snow. "Well, well," he said, "the rancher returns." Jacob shoved the twins behind a stack of crates. "You took something that was never yours." Boone smiled, teeth yellowed. "Everything in this world's for taking, Mercer. You should have learned that by now." He drew his revolver. Jacob ducked behind a beam as the first shot rang out. Wood splintered. Jacob returned fire, but Boone had cover. The twins screamed. Eli held them close. Boone fired again, this time grazing Jacob's arm. "You think you can win?" Boone roared. "I built this land. I buried better men than you." Jacob crawled along the floor, blood dripping from his sleeve. "I don't care about land," he growled. "I care about them." Then a new sound echoed behind Boone, a voice. "Micah, let go of my brother." Boone turned, and Micah fired. The bullet caught Boone in the back, dropping him to his knees. Jacob lunged forward and finished it. One punch, two, then a third until Boone stopped moving. The silence afterward was the loudest thing Jacob had ever heard. He turned. Micah stood shaking, rifle still raised. The others huddled close, clinging to each other. Jacob limped to them, gathered them up, and didn't let go. They rode out as the sun rose, lighting the world in gold. Jacob didn't know what waited next. But he knew this. They were his now. And he was never letting them go. The ride home was a slow crawl through bitter winds and shattered quiet. No one spoke much, not because there wasn't anything to say, but because some pain sits too deep for words. They were 6 souls in one wagon now, bundled in the worn blankets Jacob had packed for winter, all of them bruised in some way or another. Jacob drove with one hand still bloodied from Boone's final breath. Micah rode beside him, silent, jaw locked, eyes on the trail ahead. The children lay together in the bed of the wagon, sleeping in shifts, arms linked as if afraid the storm might return and scatter them again. The sawmill behind them had gone silent, its black smoke curling higher as flames began licking the corners. Jacob didn't set it himself, but the oil lamp that spilled during their fight did the rest. He hadn't stayed to watch it burn. "Do you think anyone saw us?" Micah asked once, when the wagon creaked past the edge of Dry Hollow's reach. Jacob shook his head. "If they did, they know better than to follow." They stopped only once before nightfall, long enough to give the children a warm meal from Jacob's provisions and let the horses drink. Eli helped gather firewood, his hands quick and careful. He hadn't cried once since Jacob freed them, not when he'd unchained the twins, not even when he'd watched Boone drop dead at Micah's bullet. But there was something brittle in the way Eli moved, something held together by sheer will. The days slipped into months the way a river curves gentle into deeper valleys, quiet, steady, reshaping everything it touched. The ranch was no longer a place of silence and echoes. It breathed now, full of life and movement, laughter and struggle, love and growing things. The land softened beneath their feet as if it, too, had decided to heal. By midsummer, the Mercers were known in town. Not for scandal, not for whispers, but for the children who walked in together with heads held high, for the rancher who never raised his voice but got more done in one morning than most could in 3, and for the quiet way they changed a place just by choosing to remain kind in a world that hadn't been kind to them. Jacob rarely went into Dry Hollow unless he had to. But when he did, he walked with Eli at his side and Micah trailing close behind, both boys learning how to trade, how to listen, how to speak with just enough steel to be respected and just enough grace to be trusted. The twins, Mercy and June, always left behind notes for Leela, telling her what they wanted from the store: candy, paper, ribbon, books. Leela managed the ledger now. Jacob had handed her the keys to the little safe under the bed, and she hadn't let him down once. She even stitched new curtains for the front windows. "Looks like a real home," she'd said, watching them sway in the breeze. Jacob had just nodded, throat too full to reply. One late afternoon, a storm rolled in fast from the south, one of those heavy August tempests that smelled of lightning and dust. Jacob rounded up the goats with Micah while Eli pulled the chickens in. The twins were already inside. Leela stood at the porch steps, arms crossed. "You've got 10 minutes, Papa." He paused mid-stride. It was the first time she called him that. She didn't repeat it, just turned and walked inside like nothing had changed. But Jacob stood in the rain a moment longer, blinking through the drops, feeling something he hadn't felt since before the sorrow took root in him. He went in soaked, boots tracking mud. Leela handed him a towel and didn't say a word. The storm passed before nightfall, thunder breaking into soft drizzle. The children slept close that night, all curled near the hearth. Jacob stayed in his chair, not reading, not moving, just watching the rise and fall of small chests, the flutter of lashes, the way June's hand stayed tucked in Mercy's. He thought of names again, not just last names, but who they were now. Micah, quiet, fiercely loyal, never asked for much but always watched everything. A protector. Eli, sharp, cautious, carried too much weight for 11 years, but never let anyone fall behind. A shepherd in the making. Leela, his fire, his compass, the one who stitched together what others might miss, the one who made a home from scraps and stubborn hope. And the twins, Mercy with her boundless imagination, and June with her questions that never stopped. Two halves of a promise that life could be beautiful again. He never asked for them, but God had brought them anyway. And now they were his. In September, something strange happened. A man came riding up the path near dusk. He wore the badge of a marshal and the look of a man used to getting answers. Jacob met him at the gate with Micah beside him, rifle slung but not raised. "Name S. Marshal Greaves," the man said. "Heard tell there's children here, runaways from up north, boys taken from the Dawson estate, girls from back east." Jacob didn't flinch. "They live here now." The marshal nodded slowly, looking at the house, at the smoke curling from the chimney, at the porch swing Leela had painted yellow. "They with you legal. They're with me by grace." Marshal Greaves chewed his cheek. "Don't care much for papers myself. Just need to know they ain't gonna be dragged off screaming in the night by some man with a claim." Jacob met his eyes. "Ain't a soul alive gonna take them." Greaves looked long at him, then tipped his hat. "Didn't think so." He left without another word. When Jacob came inside, the children were waiting. Leela had her arms folded. "Was he here for us?" "Yes." Micah's jaw tightened. "But he's gone now," Jacob said, "and you're still here." "Are we always gonna have to look over our shoulders?" Eli asked. Jacob knelt before him. "No, one day they'll look and see what you've built, not what you ran from." That night they feasted, not because of the marshal, not because anything had changed, but because they could. Rabbit stew, bread still warm from the oven, apple pie that Leela burned just slightly. They laughed anyway. Mercy dropped her spoon 3 times. June told a joke no one understood. Eli cracked a smile. Micah even sang one line of a hymn before stopping, embarrassed. Jacob stood at the head of the table and looked around. "You know what today is?" he asked. The children shook their heads. "It's the day I stopped being alone." No one spoke, but Leela reached for his hand, and one by one they all followed. By the time snow returned, the bunkhouse had grown. Jacob added a second story. The twins claimed the loft. Micah painted a sign out front, Mercer Ranch. Leela wrote under it, "We're still growing." And they were. People started coming, widows with nowhere else to go, orphans with no family left, drifters who hadn't forgotten how to work a fence line or bake bread or teach letters. They brought stories and bruises, songs and silence. Jacob took them all in. He didn't see himself as a savior, just a man who'd once been lost and now knew what found looked like. One morning in January, Leela found him sitting on the porch alone. "Cold," she said, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "I don't mind." She sat beside him. "You think Mama would have liked it here?" Jacob didn't answer right away. "I think she would have loved you." Leela's eyes shone. "I try to be good." "You are." She leaned into him. "I don't remember what it felt like to be scared anymore." Jacob exhaled. "Then I'm doing something right." When spring came again, the ranch bloomed brighter than it ever had. The Mercers were no longer 5. They were 22. And counting. Jacob kept their first 5 clothes. They always had their chores, but they also had their dreams now. Eli wanted to build a schoolhouse. Micah was saving up for cattle of his own. The twins talked of writing a book called Storm Girls, a tale about 2 sisters who tamed a tornado and made it sing lullabies. Leela kept the ledgers and planned next year's planting, already telling Jacob which herbs to try for cooking. They buried their sorrows in seeds and built with laughter. And one evening, as dusk settled gentle across the land, Jacob stood at the edge of the pasture, hands in his coat pockets, watching the wind ripple through the tall grass. He heard footsteps behind him. "Papa." It was Leela. "Come to see the sunset?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just came to be near you." They stood in silence a while longer. And then she said, voice barely a whisper, "You're not alone anymore." Jacob swallowed hard. "Neither are you." The sun dipped behind the hills. The ranch glowed gold. A storm had brought them together. But love had made them stay. And no matter what came next, one truth remained. They were family. They were Mercers. And they were home.